Hello, and welcome to the Critical Move of Telesur. Once again, Mali is the scene of confrontations between the executive and opposition forces, which are driving the people to mobilize in the streets to demand the president's resignation. What was the trigger for these demonstrations? What demands are being heard? How is the government reacting? How are the international organizations that mediate the conflict handling the issue? What geostrategic interests are there around this West African nation? Let's deploy the board. We're making the first move. In line with the ECOWAS recommendations to end the socio-political crisis in Mali, President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta appointed a small government composed of only 6 ministers. Let's hear reactions. I would like to take this opportunity to make a sincere call on to all our sisters and brothers in M5RFP and other groups. I would like to say that every member of the government who joins me are welcome and very much expected in this new team. We are aware that the added value of this reduced executive is to be able to negotiate as soon as possible the way out of the crisis in which we find ourselves, and not only resolve this crisis situation as soon as possible, but also move quickly towards the establishment of a government of national unity. I hope that this proposal for dialogue that the President of the Republic has made on several occasions, the same proposal that we are transmitting, can be heard by the actors of M5RFP, and not only heard, but also accepted, because it allows us to get out of the crisis situation in which we find ourselves. The ECOWAS establishes a regime of sanctions against those who act contrary to the process of normalization of this crisis. The objective is to find a commitment that will allow a quick end to the crisis in Mali. I am optimistic that a situation will be found. The departure of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta is without a doubt a red line for the ECOWAS, which is governed by a protocol on democracy and good governance within its radio of action. This protocol states that there should be no change of power outside the Constitution in any of the ECOWAS member countries. Nothing has changed. I said it and I'll repeat it. We maintain our position. We are not united, government and opposition, submissive or resigned people. I'd rather die a martyr than a traitor. The young people who lost their lives did not lose them in vain. We told ECOWAS that we would not want the Malian people to feel that the only goal of the ECOWAS is to keep a president in power against his people. The ECOWAS should not be an instrument to protect heads of state. It should be an instrument to serve the interests of the people. That's what we told the ECOWAS. Otherwise, we are open to work. The M5RFP requests the support of the international community and the friends of the people of Mali to obtain, first, the resignation of Mr. Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta from the functions of the President of the Republic, along with his regime. Secondly, the dissolution of the National Assembly. And third, the end of the mandate of the members of the Constitutional Court. However, the influential preacher Mahoud Dicko, leader of the street protest, softened his stance the day before in an interview with Reuters news agency. Let's see what he said. I quote, "I believe we can find a solution without the president's resignation. Besides his resignation, there are many things that can be done." When asked if he would be satisfied with the replacement of Prime Minister Boubou Ciss, who has been heavily criticized for his handling of the protest, Dicko said that change alone would not solve the crisis, but could be part of a compromise. Now the question is, who is this opposition leader who has become notorious for leading the most recent street protest in Mali? Well, I suggest you to read the article Mahoud Dicko, the key man in Mali's protest challenging President Keïta, published on the France 24 website on July 14. I'll read some paragraphs. The anti-government movement M5-RFP is a conglomerate of opposition politicians, anti-corruption activists, and religious representatives. Among them, DICO is a peerless mass agitator. Back at the time, DICO was Keda's ally. The 66-year-old religious is not novice in politics. Nicknamed the Imam of the People by his own followers, he has been playing a significant role in Mali's public life for more than a decade, even presiding over the High Islamic Council from 2008 to 2019. Like other religious leaders in the region, his branch of Islam is difficult to classify, as it mixes conservatism in the social sphere, nourished by the apprenticeship in Saudi Arabia, with respect of the mystical traditions of West Africa. The Imam became known in 2009 when he led a protest campaign that forced the Malian president Amadou Toumani to water down a reform that would have expanded women's rights. More recently, he managed to have a school book mentioning homosexuality removed. He even injured some sector of the population when he suggested that the terrorist attack in Bamako in 2015 against the Radisson Blu Hotel was a divine punishment for the Malians who imported homosexuality from the West. Besides, he criticizes the presence of French troops in Malian territory as a colonial practice, even though at the time he welcomed the military intervention against jihadist insurgents in 2013, stirring up an anti-French feeling that is disturbing in Paris. But the Imam was not always a thorn in President Kia's side. In 2013, in fact, he supported IBK and accompanied him on several international trips, especially in the Gulf, where his connections with Saudi Arabia lifted the president. It was former Prime Minister Soumaïla Boubèye Maïga decisions to remove him from this negotiating post that precipitated the disagreements between DICO and the government. Angry, the People's Imam took tens of thousands of people to the streets to demand Boubèye's resignation. Another goal he achieved. Another sign of his political ambition is that Mahmoud DICO left the High Islamic Council in the same year to found his own Islamic movement, called the Coordination of Movements, Associations and Supporters. Since then, Mali's fractured opposition has gravitated around this movement, hoping to capitalize on its widespread popularity, with most of Keda's opponents grouped in the June 5th movement, named after the first day of the last month's protests. DICO has become an unofficial spokesperson of many of the complaints of Malians, exasperated by the continuing economic and security crisis. What international bodies have mediated to resolve this conflict in Mali? What have they proposed? We will tell you about it. On July 27, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, held an extraordinary virtual summit to address the socio-political crisis in Mali. The 15 member countries of the national body called on the Malians to return to normality. To this end, they published a resolution with recommendations that must be complied with. Otherwise, those who carry out acts that undermine the process of normalization will be sanctioned according to the document. First, ECOWAS recommended the resignation of 31 deputies considered badly elected during the parliamentary elections held between March and April, including the president of the parliament, Moussa Timidé. The Constitutional Court was also recomposed in accordance with the provisions of Mali's constitution. A commission of inquiry was also set up to identify those responsible for the violence that broke out in the country this month. Right after it, the ECOWAS then called for legislative elections to be held and then for the formation of a government of national unity with the participation of the opposition and the civil society. Taking these recommendations into consideration, Malian President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta created a small government composed of only 6 ministers. The opposition movement June 5 Patriotic Forces Grouping has argued that the conclusions of the Summit of Heads of State do not take into account the depth of seriousness of the socio-political crisis that, it says, mortgages the destiny of Mali, insists that President Keita must resign. However, ECOWAS has rejected on several occasions the possibility of the president's resignation, and its battery of proposals to solve the crisis does not include this option. In addition to the mediating position of this entity, the African Union has urged the parties to work together to find consensual solutions and get out of the crisis, taking into account the aspirations of the people and their political forces. The Security Council was quick to take a stand. The UN agency expressed its concern and called on the parties to the conflict to follow the ECOWAS recommendations without delay. Let's do a geopolitical mapping of the African nation where we are focusing the analysis today. Mali, strategic West African nation. The Republic of Mali is located in the heart of West Africa, which is why it has no coastline. It is the 8th largest country on the continent with an area of 1,240,192 square kilometers. Enjoys a strategic location, being a territory of passage between sub-Saharan Africa and the Maghreb. To the north, it borders on Algeria, to the east on Niger, to the west on Mauritania and Senegal, while to the south it borders on the Ivory Coast, Guinea and Burkina Faso. Its capital and most populated city is Bamako. Previously, the territory was the cradle of the three West African empires that once controlled the trans-Saharan trade: the Empire of Ghana, the Empire of Mali, and the Songhai. By the 19th century, Mali had fallen under the control of France and became part of what was the French Sunday. By 1959, it had gained its independence along with Senegal. It became the Malian Federation, which would disintegrate a year later. It was not only until 1991 that Mali became a nation with a multi-party system, following a coup that led to the drafting of a new constitution. Despite its territorial extension, the country is one of the poorest in the world, with an average per capita income of $1,500 per year. However, between 2002 and 2005, the gross domestic product began to increase, reaching an annual growth rate of approximately 17.6%. Mali's economic structure focuses on agriculture and fishing. Its soil is rich in gold, uranium, phosphate, limestone, and salt. It is precisely gold, livestock, and agriculture that account for 80% of exports. Despite the fact that the territory is controlled by French companies, which dominate the economy, about half the population lives below the poverty line. Let's take our first break in our critical move. Remember, there is always a strategic move in social media for you to participate and leave your opinion. Social protests in Mali following controversial parliamentary elections demand the resignation of the executive, victim of two coups in 1991 and 2012. The former French colony is still unable to escape terrorist violence. What could be behind it? Leave your opinion. Let's take a short break. We'll be back very soon.
Telesur, desde nuestra cuarentena aquí en nuestro hogar, siempre con Chávez, nuestras felicitaciones. 15 años defendiendo la verdad de América Latina y del Caribe, de los pueblos del sur, 15 años ganando la batalla comunicacional, la batalla simbólica, la batalla por la verdad. Felicidades Telesur, todo nuestro amor y admiración. No exagero cuando digo que Telesur es la mejor televisora mundial en materia de noticias, la mejor en toda la línea de la calidad. Felicidades Telesur, una obra fundada por nuestro comandante infinito Hugo Chávez, por el comandante Fidel Castro Ruz. Es la obra de ellos, su milagro, que sigue vivo.
Felicitaciones Telesur, felicitaciones a todo el personal, a todos los periodistas, a todo el personal de Telesur, por esa extraordinaria labor que día a día hacen de llevar la noticia veraz y oportuna a hogares en muchas partes del mundo. Felicitaciones.
Felicidades. 15 años.
Comienza el análisis en nuestra jugada
We start the
crítica
analysis in our
desde el
critical
propio
move.
Malí.
We have from Mali itself
Nuestros invitados. Su nombre es Diakaridia
Diakaridia Diakité. He is president of Mali's Hugo Chavez Foundation, member of the Union of Young Progressives and Pan-Africanists. And from Argentina, we have Sergio Galeana, specialist in African history. Welcome both of you to our critical move. If you allow me, Sergio, I'd like to start with Diakaridia. Welcome to our critical move. We want to know what's happening today in Mali. Thank you so much to all the viewers in Latin America and the Caribbean. Right now in Mali, we are going through a very, very hard times, very critical moments. We're facing a very strong oppression. What we have to know is that it's not only a political oppression, and it's also a popular opposition. The people who does not agree with the government, people who don't know, people who has desire for the change, because for more than 20 years the same system, nothing has changed. So the government is trying to solve the problem, but the first reason of it was the fall of Colonel Karassi, because back in that time when we said yes, and the rest of the countries, they're going to have trouble. So after the fall of Bagli, a lot of things had happened, and there have been a lot of death, starting with the security. So that had led to many coincidences that right now in Mali, we have a lot of difficulties to control lack of discipline. We have more than 20,000 foreign soldiers in Mali, occupying the north side. So with the arrival of President, people thought that he could be the solution to be able to get back the territory and to what Mali really need. And after 7 years, a lot of people were hoping for the change, but this change was never effective. So he had tried to bring the people together and be able to make a movement and ask the president to resign. And now we see that we have tried to talk with the people, but the problem still persists and there's still no peaceful solution. Not yet, because we are waiting for the last mission led by the president of Niger, but something that was completely rejected from both sides, whether it's the opposition or whether it's the other part. So now we are dealing with this really hard, intense situation across the country. Thank you, Diakaridia. Stay with us for a couple of minutes, please. Sergio, I also welcome you to our critical move. As someone who truly knows about all of these African issues, Diakaridia has mentioned an element that is geopolitically central, and it is that domino effect that has generated the overthrow and subsequent assassination of the Green Muammar Gaddafi leader in Libya. In the other, I don't know if, I think we have some connection problems. As long as we have problems, so as long as we keep talking to Diakaridia, I reiterate, he's president of Mali's Hugo Chavez Foundation. Diakaridia, you mentioned the resignation of president of Mali. So my question is this a popular demand, or is it being supported by certain sectors of the opposition? I ask you this in order to better understand what is happening in that African nation. What is happening right now is the demand of the president's. It's not only the political are asking for the president's resignation. We have an opposition that wants the system to change. It's not only a political movement, it's everyone's agreement that they want a deep change. And with the current situation, it's going to be very difficult because he will open up to new elections and call on the youth to change the government, the governing system. People want to understand there are differences. It's not a political party, it's not only an opposition, it's the people united, which reaches almost the majority, because they want a better future. So there is the explanation that I can give you, taking into account that all the leaders that formed the M5, but behind the M5 is the powerful force, is the force of the people who are supporting M5 movement. Thank you, Dia Caridia. Sergio, I understand that we have you back online, so I welcome back to our critical move. I was telling you before that someone who really knows the history of Africa, our other guest was mentioning a topic that we think is central to this geopolitics, is the overthrow and subsequent assassination of the Muammar Gaddafi Green leader in Libya on November 20. And now, even taking into account the warnings that the neighboring nations were making since then about a possible transnationalization of the destabilization that is taking place today in Libya, and precisely Mali is suffering from it today. Of course, obviously, there is a straight direction between the overthrow of the president, but also it's not a coincidence that not long after the overthrow of Libyan president, other countries were formed the M5, which is a group that has an objective that is linked to the cooperation, but obviously that coordination, it's mainly linked to the fight against imperialism, and where France has a very strategic role, and it's something very important to take into consideration in all these instability and regional processes. Today, well, we see the presence of foreign troops, and we see a French that has more than 5,000 people from abroad. It's the largest military operation seen even the Algeria war, even bigger than the war in Algeria in 1971, which marked a very strategic importance that France has, and particularly for the Sahel zone, which is a zone that recently have seen violence for the incapacity from the states to be able to control the territory. And of course the popular discourage, above all with the elections. Thank you, Sergio. I also invite you to stay with us for a couple of minutes. France repeats the same France that played a leading role in the overthrow of the Libyan president in 2011. Dia Caridia, in order to better understand the current situation in your country, I would like to ask you to what extent the controversial parliamentary elections held between March and April of this year contributed to this climate of social destabilization. What happened during those parliamentary elections? Why did the people not agree with the results of those parliamentary elections, and that in fact it is part of the demands of Malian society? Okay, well, what can I answer? My answer to that question is that people were really discouraged. People were not happy about it. They didn't want to expect the elections to be able to sanction the power party. So when they called on for the elections on March, there were more than 31 deputies who were badly elected. So the people voted for their deputies in the Constitutional Court, but they changed the results and they named 31 deputies. We can say that, we can call it that way. But when it comes to the instability, the discouraging of people, the people don't want that regime anymore, because with the elections, the change could be positive. But now people only think that only the streets can demand for the change. That's why the people is outside on the streets demanding for a deep change. So Mali has 147 deputies. Out of those parliamentary, there are 31 who should be elected. So they gave us a limited date, 31, to negotiate, and if they don't, we need to take another measure to finish it, and this is what we are seeing right now. But to resume it, in Mali, people think that change can only be won in the streets, not on the elections, because there is no credibility on the consensual agreement, because if you vote, well, your vote is not respected. And the people want that change to be right now. Thank you, Diacaridia. Sergio, listening to the words of Diacaridia, I think we can draw partial conclusions by now. The problem is that these people no longer trust the state institutions of that nation. Given this scenario, what guarantees are that a deep change will take place in a country that was also the victim of two coups in 1991 and 2012, and since then the destabilization and terrorist violence has been unrestrained? I think the mediation initiative has created, I think what they're looking is to stop at and this foreign intervention and state powers that in other countries. The mediations doesn't allow to find the right solution and stop the spilling of blood. So I think that beyond the good intentions and reasonable, we should take a look at a bigger compromise. When we see France, France is mainly friend of President Mali, and in this sense, there should be some sort of pressure, not only from the African Union, so that the state government, and also as the United Nations Security Council, I think there should be a little more firm voice when it comes to terms to understand that the firm support to the current regime generates a bigger destabilization just because of it, because what it does generate is an untrust of the majority of democratic institutions, and this, what it does is to generate more violence, because many times we are seeing this scheme of intervention from foreign actors such as France, that what they really want is to increase the discomfort among the population, and the more all the people who are protesting on the streets, and they're ready to express that discomfort. Thank you, Sergio. Diacaridia,
Uno de los autores más influyentes,
One of the most influential authors, not authors, but the most influential leaders of the protests, has undoubtedly been Marc Judico. He said that the president had to resign for that deep change which we were talking about. However, we said it at the beginning of our critical move. In an interview with the agency Reuters this Wednesday, Dico said, "We can find a solution without the resignation of the president." To what do you attribute this change of position by this opposition leader?
Y hablando en realidad, el imam dijo desde el inicio.
Well, the imam said since the beginning of his movement, he has never said openly, officially, publicly the resignation of the president. He has never said. The M5 is one thing, and what the imam said is another thing. When he called to the mosque, he's a religious leader who has never been inside the political scene. This is his first time. So he called on the president to make a deep change. He limited himself to that word, deep change, to work in order to satisfy the social necessity of the people. But he never officially talked about the resignation of the president. It's the people, the one that said that they want the president to resign, but he has never said that he's going to renounce officially. The parliament cannot be trusted. The parliament cannot be trusted. According to the Constitution, the president of the parliament will assume the president's functions. So the president should be left to finish his government, but to do some deep changes. So are you saying that the imam never officially said that he wanted the president to resign? However, that is what many media outlets, the French press, among others, mention. What do you think this editorial line has been taken by these media outlets, highlighting this alleged statement by the imam, which, as you said, officially, in reality, has not been the case? On whose side is the press? Look, in order to better understand the situation in Mali, there is a media war against the Mali because it always has fought against the France interest. He has always been opposed to the French companies in Mali. It's someone who wants the sovereignty and the power of Mali. And this upsets the West. And France is saying that the president wants to renounce to have an Islamic State. That is false. He wants to give an image such as a coup, but it was never like that. We need to understand that he never officially said that the president was going to renounce, it was going to resign. Dico is the leader of the Malian people. Thank you. Sergio, in addition to this media war that our guest is denouncing from Mali, what other factors could we mention of a geopolitical nature that could influence the present and future of this African nation? Well, just as you were saying before, there is a presence, a French presence in the region, which is very important. And in this sense, we can find a lingering and these colonizations, and we can see that these companies want to obtain evidently. And when we see and when we read that the African and all the Europe nations, and when we see this situation,
Perdimos la comunicación nuevamente.
We lost communication once again with Sergio Galeana. I'm going to take this moment to thank him and also thank very much Diakaridia, who has explained us from the inside, from Mali itself, what is happening in that African nation. Hugs to both of you. See you soon. Let's take another break in our critical move once again. Remember, there is a strategic move in social media for you to participate. Social protests in Mali following controversial parliamentary elections demand the resignation of the executive. Victim of two coups in 1991 and 2012, the former French colony is still unable to escape terrorist violence. What could be behind it? You can take as a basis what our African guest was telling us. He has given us certain lights north about what could be the present and future of that West African nation. Stay with us. We'll be back soon.
Repasemos cuál es la importancia de Malí en el tablero geopolítico.
What Mali is important is on the geopolitical board. Sergio Galeana, specialist in African history, had already given us some insight on this matter, but let's go deeper. As a former colony of France, the Central African Republic of Mali has not been able to fully detach itself like other African nations, where the European country tries to stay anchored by geostrategic interests. France's relationship with Africa has not disappeared in recent decades, but has taken different forms. One example is the alleged peacekeeping mission approved by the UN Security Council in 2013 in the context of the coup against President Amadou Toumani Touré. Since then, the European Union has been planning security strategies and mechanisms to supposedly deal with the organized crime and terrorism operating in the region. Even though it was the Malian government itself that at that time requested the presence of its colonial exponency in the conflict, analysts do not rule out the possibility that France will take advantage of the so-called war on terror to acquire resources such as hydrocarbons and minerals such as gold and uranium. Experts assure that it is precisely the great powers that finance terrorism and then appear on the board as protectors of the people. Belonging to the Sahel region, Mali is part of the G5 plus Sahel, which includes Mauritania, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad. The area is experiencing a multilateral security, economic, and humanitarian crisis, aggravated by the violence being waged since 2012 by armed groups allied with factions and the self-described Islamic State. The conflict in North Africa have also been seen as the collateral results of the war unleashed in 2011 by Western countries and allies in the Arab world against Gaddafi's Libya to destroy its model of government and settle in that rich region. We continue with the analysis. Now we have from Venezuela Luis Paz, expert on sub-Saharan Africa issues. We have him through by telephone. Luis, I send you a greeting in the distance, and I would like to keep the last of this material and how has served as domino effect what happened in 2011 in Gaddafi's Libya and in the countries of West Africa, especially the region of the Sahel. Sergio Galeana also gave us his thoughts. What do you think about it? Well, he talks about the crisis that there was in Libya, that was the civil war in Libya that still continues in this African country. In the case of Mali, we've seen a crisis that affected North Mali, especially in 2012. There was the coup against the president that generated the crisis in the 2012 year, and everything happened so fast that even the Malian state was about to perish. They closed the north of Mali and declared it as a new state, and this forced the Malian government to ask help from France. France had to intervene. And back in that moment, the idea to fight against terrorism was not to fight it on French territory, but in the borders, but from the French point of view, in the zone of the Malian was used as a military base, but this tendency has been kept. and has been increasing. This is one of the answers that we can give. If some countries open up borders to imperialism, the doors, well, then it's going to be very difficult to withdraw it. Mali has had first and third place as a gold producer, one of the most richest in the African continent, and on the also has maybe if it's not can compare to the European countries if the West media sees it as a poor country, but it has a very strategic and important position in the north of the region, when it has, which is also a property of a French company, and there is also the center of Western Africa, which allows to control passages of routes, manage the terrorist groups that are found located in the area, and also to control the mining resources, these mining resources which are the most important in this moment to keep the developing of the industry. Now you say, if the door is opened to imperialism, but really Mali, former French colony, did it ever disattach of that subordination? In 1970, had a very different situation when it comes to French colonialism. However, its independence took more time because the line assumed by Sékou Touré was the hero who originally started the position and gained its independence in 1958. Mali came a little bit later because it realized that it couldn't keep that situation of occupation any longer, in which the country didn't have any control over its economical policy. It couldn't handle it. It was like a relative autonomy, and therefore it won its independence in the 70s. And a lot of independence processes are going to be fulfilled during this time. And other countries that are going to form part and are going to agitate their independence process, because this is important for them. In the case of Mali, it's important to say that at the beginning they have said the French presence to fight against terrorism. Back in 2012, 2013, it was a burden back in that time to them because it represents as a bad thought of the past, and the population still remember it, and that's why there are some of these demonstrations. And we have seen some declarations from the French presidency, and that has generated a reject from the population, especially against the terrorist groups. But it's dangerous for that. The terrorism present in that area of Africa, we have highlighted it, we have put it on the geopolitical board on other occasions. Now, who is promoting, who is encouraging the presence of terrorist groups in the area, or did they just come out of nowhere? Well, no, not precisely. There are some groups that have appeared of the same regional dynamic, but some others, such as the Islamic State, it's a figure that has no regional attachment. It is an element that has been inserted from outside to generate conditions for to provide a foreign intervention. And in the case of Nigeria, and in the case of Burkina Faso, it's even higher. But there are some structural elements that affect states. It's the issue of poverty, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of employment. And it depends also of the economic size. And during a context such as the COVID pandemic, the state has to flexibilize a little bit more the quarantine because it couldn't allow that the economic crisis to hit more the country. Now, the terrorism that has been affected has been seen in the center of Mali, also against the Blue Ethnia. This has accelerated a very important situation in the country and has provoked that the state lose his capacity as a monopoly. Also, the state has made a mistake that has been seen in other countries, which is providing the population to be able to defend themselves. And this only has come to magnify the problem. And President Ibrahim has to bring a solution to this crisis so that the state and the army can enter and face directly with the terrorist groups who are in the central and north area of Mali. This is a problem, Luis, that other countries in the area are suffering from, weak armies. Why? Exactly. A lot of them depends on the giving of countries such as Qatar, France. They sometimes ask for help of the United States, but the problem is that the United States help comes as a condition and it has no right respect. It doesn't matter if the country is under crisis. This also affects Mali in the sense that it keeps to reach the further zones of the country. It's a really big extension in the country. So the states doesn't have presence in many parts of the country, so this is taken by the terrorist groups to take the further areas and affect the state security. We have seen thousands of military, and this has provoked that the state has taken a weakened position, which assumes that the state is not doing anything to fight against terrorism. Luis, as a way of conclusion, I will take advantage of your presence by phone so you can give your conclusions to our critical move today with the geopolitical vision that characterizes you. Where is the solution to this socio-political problem that Mali is going through right now? The resignation of the executive. This resignation is expressed from the streets protest, or the reformulation of the government team, such as President has just done recently, appointing a 6-member cabinet, a reduced government on the recommendation of the ECOWAS itself. Where is the solution to this crisis? Well, the resignation is not acceptable because his term should end on 2023. There is not a mechanism that keeps him from fulfill his term until that. So the solution is on a national unity government, such as the one that is proposed by Mali, to guarantee that the national unity to solve all the problems and activate once again the whole elections with no irregularities on the tables and on the polls, and to keep moving forward. Let's remember the case in the 2007, the Zimbabwe case, where to establish opposition in being able to moving forward on the problems of the country. The Mali problem is at a terrorism level, at a political level. I think that the first problem that should be resolved is the issue of the government. Once that the government issue is reestablished, I think that the rest of the issues will emerge and to be able to recover as time goes by. It's not going to be able to accept unilateral measures and accept coups, because in that case the country would. We know that because we have seen it before. Back in 2012, they affect the economy of the country through some sanctions, increasing the poverty. So right now, Mali needs to think more about the country and more than on the political individual interest. So I think that the center of the problem is to resolve the government through a national unity. Well, Luis, as always, thanks a million for helping us in this investigation around problems of our world, and in this case to West Africa, particularly the situation in Mali. See you soon. Till next time. For today, we close the geopolitical board.